Good morning, guys. It is August 17th. We are 2020. We are at the Mesa Overlook, and the reason that we're here is because this area, this view right here, gives us a really excellent perspective of the different life zones that we're talking about in this class. So the purpose of this video is to give you a landscape view of the different life zones and for us to discuss how the abiotic factors determine to a large extent these life zones and the characteristics of these life zones. And then I'll talk to you a little bit about Blodgett Peak and the Waldo Canyon fire. So let's start by talking, let's look at over here. You guys can see Blodgett Peak in the distance. Blodgett Peak was affected by the Waldo Canyon fire. This was a pretty big fire. It burned about 20,000 acres and it came into Colorado Springs. It was very damaging in terms of property damage, etc. That was in 2012, and you can still see the effects of the Waldo Canyon fire. So in another video, I'll take you to Blodgett Peak and I'll show you some of the effects of the fire. It's really interesting, some really interesting ecological questions we can ask related to fire, right? How does fire affect colonization rates of different plant species? How does it affect soil quality? There are all sorts of ecological questions you can test in a burned versus unburned area. So that's the effect of the Waldo Canyon fire. And then if we look back, if we make our way back slowly over to here, we can see we're looking at Garden of the Gods, right? So this is one of the lower life zones, right? So we start with the foothills, we start with the grassland, right? But now we are in the foothills. Where I'm standing, I would categorize this as the foothills. This is pinyon juniper shrubland. You can see how important the geology is in determining this life zone. So you have, your Dakota sandstone. You have the effect of the rocks, which is important in creating shade, which is important in precipitation patterns and snowpack patterns. So as you're looking at these life zones, I want you to ask yourself, okay, what patterns can I detect in the landscape? Where are plants growing? Are plants clumped in a particular area? Why? Is there something that those rocks are doing for those plants? What benefits are those rocks providing for those plants? And then what type of plants that we've discussed are going to be most common in the pinyon juniper shrubland? And then if we go up one life zone, so by the way, the pinyon juniper shrubland, the foothills, that's about 6,000 to about 6,800 feet. Okay, more or less, these elevations are approximate. And then we go up a little bit higher behind Garden of the Gods, and you can see the montane. And the montane is about 6,800 to about 9,500 feet. So that's obviously higher up. The soil is going to be slightly different. In chapter 3, we talk about terrestrial adaptations, right? And what kind of soil texture, what kind of soil qualities would you expect in a really dry area like Garden of the Gods? And how do you think soil texture and soil quality changes as you move up in elevation? Remember that soil texture will affect the matrix potential, will affect how well those soil particles can hold on to the water particles, right? It'll affect cation exchange capacity, which will have a direct effect on the nutrients that are held in that soil. So as we move up in elevation, think about the dominant plants. Are pinyon junipers still dominant in the montane? How soil would change, how precipitation patterns, or rather snowpack, and the effects of snowpack on the plants that can grow there, how that would change. And then if you look like we see Pikes Peak, and above the montane we have the subalpine. So the subalpine is going to basically be about 10,000 to 11,400 feet, which is approximate, okay? But that is the elevation of Treeline. So as you scan across Pikes Peak, you see a very clear difference between the green, where the trees are, right, and then above, where there are no trees, and we call that the alpine life zone, right? So that is the highest life zone. There are no trees in the alpine. And what's really important for us to remember is that treeline is not a line. That's a misnomer. It is a really dynamic entity that is dependent on the abiotic factors and as well as the biotic factors. So remember, in this class, a recurring theme is the interaction between the abiotic and the biotic. So look at treeline, ask yourself, what does treeline look like? What affects treeline? And how is treeline changing? That is a central question in this class as we talk about shrubification in the Arctic. We talk about shrubification in the alpine, going into the alpine, right? And treeline is really where we see these changes occurring. So if I could take you up there, I would. But this is the best we have. One last thing I want to say about treeline, guys, is wind is a really important abiotic factor at treeline. So although I can't show you, okay, there is another video for this class at Elk Park, which is at treeline on Pikes Peak. And you can see the tree islands. You can see the importance of rocks and how those rocks provide wind protection and shade for plants growing there. When you're at treeline, you can see a pattern called flagging, where trees have branches on one side but not on the other side because the wind is so intense. So there are different characteristics that I like to point out at treeline, and unfortunately I can't take you up there, but I'd like for you to make connections between this video and then the other videos we have at treeline and videos where I'm teaching you about the plants and the life zone, so that you can start to piece all of this together. That's the purpose of this life zone presentation. And I think